Bismillah. So I'm just bringing everyone in. Come in. Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. Welcome to our Zoom session. I'm just admitting everyone in. So before I hand it over to my distinguished guests, Dr. Ufuk and Dr. Elisabeth, just give me a couple of minutes to admit everyone in, just to do the technical stuff, and then we'll formally start, inshallah. So, right, okay, I think there's still quite a few people on the waiting list, but I'm going to start anyway. Just a quick reminder, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, brothers and sisters. Welcome to the session, Islamic courses session, titled Book Review Reflection, Ghazali and the Poetics of Imagination. We're very privileged and honored to have Professor Ebrahim Moosa from the University of Notre, which is in the US, and it's hosted by Dr. Ufuk Topkara from the Institute of Advanced Studies in Culture, University of Virginia, and also Dr. Ufuk is going to join us later, but right now it's going to be his wife, Dr. Elisabeth Becker from the University of Virginia as well. Okay, so quick reminder, Dr. Elisabeth is formally going to introduce the subject and the professor, but a quick reminder to everyone, housekeeping rules. As you come into the Zoom, you are muted. Please don't try and unmute. I have stopped from you from unmuting, but please do keep your phones or whatever devices you use on mute. It is being recorded. If you're not registered, leave your email address to receive a copy of this session. And finally, there is a Q&A session. What we're going to have for the next 30 to 40 minutes, we're going to have a conversation queue, questions by Dr. Becker and Dr. Ufuk directly to Professor Moosa about the book and some of the subjects in there. And then we're going to open up for Q&A with everyone towards the end. So there is a substantial amount of time for everyone to have questions. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Elisabeth. Thank you, Sami.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, thank you for inviting us. This was a really great opportunity. We both, myself and Ufuk, work with Professor Moosa's work quite a bit in very different ways. And so I just will, in about 30 seconds, kind of introduce those two perspectives we'll talk about today, and then I will start talking with Professor Moosa. So I am a cultural sociologist, and so I'm going to start this from a more interdisciplinary point of view, thinking through Professor Moosa's book and his work and the way that it can be used to cross boundaries, both within academia and thinking more broadly in society. And then Ufuk will come back and talk more in depth about the kind of Islamic theological and philosophical implications of the work. So we seek some balance. So thank you, Professor Moosa. I will start it off and then we can kind of see in what direction it goes. But as a sociologist who is working directly with your work, one of the things that has come up with me that I would like to hear more about is the way in which this specific book, Ghazali and the Poetics of Imagination, can help us to develop a critical lens that sort of moves from the personal to the political, which I think that you accomplish in your book. And there are various concepts which we can delve more deeply into, but I would like perhaps to start with your idea of the dihliz. This is the threshold position. It's a position of in-betweenness, and this is kind of woven throughout your text. And what you think this means, not only for this text, but for thinking through the place of Islamic scholarship and its conversation with a lot of broader societal, political, theological, kind of cross-disciplinary conversations that are happening today, because yeah, that really stood out to me.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Elisabeth Becker, and to Mizan for inviting me to this wonderful platform. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you for doing this. So, you know, I lost you a little bit during your question time, but I think I more or less know what you're asked. It was either my connection, but I got the gist of it. So, you know, I mean, if I just give you a 2-sentence biographical background, I grew up in, you know, I was born and raised in apartheid South Africa, and in a family that is of, you know, South Asian heritage, and I was neither black enough nor white enough to fit in, right? So those people who have South Asian heritage, we were called Indian. You're somewhere between colored and black and the whole, you know, the color spectrum in South Africa. And I grew up in a majority, colored area, as they would call it in South Africa. So I also didn't fit in there, but the majority of Muslims in the Western Cape, where I grew up, are of what we call Malay background, and they would be identified as colored. So there are cultural differences. There are all kinds of internal, forms of discrimination between different groups and so on. So that's the context I grew up in. I always heard of this man called al-Ghazali, and as a kid, but I had no clue of who this person was. Either somebody, someone mentions the mosque, or somebody talks about highly about this person. And then when I go to study theology in India, that's the name that still hangs around with me. And as I mentioned in the book, I see this red covered, vinyl covered book that I pick up in Muhammad Ali Road in Mumbai, and I keep it as a talisman because it's a book by Ghazali, right? And so when I leave India, come to South Africa, first through a sojourn into journalism in the UK, then back in South Africa, I begin to I now have to deal with the situation of apartheid. I need the resources to make me understand what it is to be a Muslim in a racist society. Slowly and gradually, I gingerly begin to approach this man Ghazali and start reading his major magnum opus called Ihya Ulumuddin, that is the revival or resuscitation of the sciences of religion. And to cut a long story short, studying Ghazali made me understand that in the he died in 1111, in the beginning of the 12th century, and his dilemmas of dealing with different knowledge systems, and my dilemma of dealing with different knowledge systems. My heritage is Muhammad and the Islamic tradition, and on the other hand, I'm also heir to the Western tradition, Aristotle and Plato, and everybody that came in between, and also these two heritages are mine. Then I'm also a South African, and Africa is my location, right? And Africa has a particular colonized location, and I'm trying to find myself in that space for liberation. And in that way, Ghazali becomes my interlocutor. So this book starts with a publisher in the UK asking me, can you write a book on the life and times of Ghazali? Well, my connection with Ghazali was in my dissertation, which I haven't published yet. I look at Ghazali and theology and Ghazali and language, and hopefully I will get back to that work soon. And once I did that, this publisher asked me, can you do a life and times of Ghazali? It was around about that time in 1998 that I also moved to Stanford University as a visiting professor. And as I start this project, I realized I don't want to do a life and times. This guy's offering me too many things. It's setting my head aflame, so to speak. I mean, it's all kinds of passionate issues here. He's trying to make me understand about self and about identity and who I am. And at the same time, I'm also very much reading in depth Foucault and Derrida and Western philosophy. And so in some ways, Ghazali allows me to bring these two heritages into a conversation. And people either love this book or hate this book. The people who study Ghazali, say, oh my God, there's nothing in here, but it's all about Ebrahim Moosa. And the people who study theory, they say, what is Ghazali doing in theory? I said, Ghazali's got everything to do with theory, because theory is not some abstract thing, but theory is something that guides us to understand complex issues in very subtle ways.
That's fantastic. I think that is part of the sort of the uniqueness of this book. Professor Moosa knows this a bit, but the work that I've been working on, I've brought you somewhat into conversation with who I would term the great Jewish German thinkers of the 20th century, who are struggling with a lot of the
I want to hear more about that. Can you say a little bit more about that?
So I think that there is this struggle with being in between, being both of a place and in a place, but not fully belonging, not being fully included. Obviously, in your experience in apartheid, there's a lot of similarities, I think. And out of that, though, you have this opportunity, and that's something extremely striking in your book, and the way that you brought Ghazali into conversation with broader conversations about inclusion and diversity, but also conversations that come from the Islamic tradition. For instance, you talk about the Prophet, the idea that Islam was always a stranger, and that being a quote unquote stranger is not necessarily a negative position. it's often presented this way in modernity. In Zygmunt Bauman's work, for instance, he talks a lot about modernity and the seeking of order, the obsession with order, which he argues actually leads to the Holocaust. But that this obsession with order, instead of recognizing plurality and forging solidarity while recognizing that plurality, which is the other option in plural societies that we all live in modernity. And so I think that kind of this idea of the stranger taking it back, there is something really powerful and almost emancipatory in that. It makes me think a lot of liberation theology and Catholicism as well. And but the ways in which tradition can speak to and critique in a critically productive way, not critique in terms of burning down, as you speak to. You're using the Western philosophical tradition as well. You're not burning down the Western philosophical tradition, but bring them into critical conversation to make sense of your own positionality. But it maybe I'm projecting here, but I have a question regarding this. Like, are you also trying to make sense of these kind of supposed, in sociological terms, we speak about it a lot as quote unquote contending modernities, but the idea that there isn't a singular modernity that we're now living in, that we've moved into temporally, the time doesn't really work in that way, where we kind of just move forward progressionally from the past, but that tradition can actually teach us something about the present that we live in. And that Ghazali, I mean, I love that you call him a friend. You don't call him I don't know what you would call him even, because he's in a text, but you do call him an interlocutor, but also a friend. Like, you forge a relationship with him through his text and are able to bring him to bear on the present. And I wonder what your motivations behind that are, but more so what you see as that contributing to these big conversations that are not only about epistemological traditions, but like what they can say to the world that we live in now.
No, thank you. There's a set of really interesting questions, so I'm going to try and not speak alone, but I want to speak with you, in conversation with you. So I think the motivation was that like myself, a 20th, 21st century Muslim, I wrote this book started writing it in the 1990s, which is still the 20th century, so we've crossed centuries. I kept on thinking, where am I in this world? Who am I? Where am I going to go? And this world is, as you correctly pointed, I do feel out of place. A term Edward Said used, out of place, right? We're neither Western nor are we Eastern. We are somewhere in between. We are heirs to multiple heritages. And so the question is, why do I make Ghazali my friend? Because either Ghazali is used as an icon that no one can talk to, and he's an intimidating figure. Yeah. And Ghazali has all the answers, and I don't think of that. I think that the answers lie with us. Yeah, we have to, but we can start the conversation. We can have a conversation with the past, but the past does not have all the answers. That's the problem in much of Islamic thought. Much of Islamic thought is that there's some kind of talismanic solution to current day problem, which is, I think, is lazy Islam. That's lazy work. That someone must provide the answer magically. The Quran has the answer. The Sunnah has the answer. No, the answer lies in effort. Yeah. The answer lies in struggle. And there's a Quranic verse that says, وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا. Those who struggle in our cause, we will show them multiple ways, multiple pathways. Exactly what you said, that I think of the plurality of possibilities as I read Ghazali. Yes, Ghazali had some very strong opinions about politics, and about philosophy, and he fought with Muslim philosophers a great deal, and some of them, and also blackballed some of them, like Ibn Sina, and used strong language, which I think could have been done differently, but nevertheless he did it, and so we're still struggling with that aftermath. But yet Ghazali himself opens up the kind of plurality of ways of understanding what is the world, and how does one live in the world, and how does one understand Islam in a pluralistic way. And I think that is the great thing. And I think the other thing that you pointed out is the question of making sense of contending modernities. So in my work, I try to decenter the conversation by saying it's not only about the Western epistemology. but it's also about epistemology that requires translation, which is my legacy, the stuff that
Yeah.
I've inherited from the Islamic tradition that requires some kind of translation. Obviously, some things are gained in translation, some things are lost in translation. We're fully aware of that. But that's just the way it was. In the same way that Ghazali translated Aristotle and Plato in his time. And people who were purists would say, oh my God, you didn't, forgot this part of Aristotle and you didn't take that part of Plato. And he would say, no, I'm going to take what works for me, what makes sense to me, right? And so I think in this world in which we are living, which we call this era, we call it modernity, which is now being altered by ways in which we now harness nature and matter and mechanization and now digitalization and a whole new way of information techniques that we are using in communicating with each other. Our world has radically changed. I mean, space and time has also shrunk, or a new kind of perception of that has taken place. So we require resources to think about that. And the most important thing that I think Ghazali taught me is to think about the self, one's identity, but also not only the surface identity, but also what lies beyond that. In other words, one's spiritual nature, but not spiritual nature in this kind of, sense that only locks in the spiritual nature of a human being in knowledge production that goes back 500-700 years, because that would be like, giving me knowledge that only makes me equipped to live on Mars. I'm living on Earth in the 21st century, right? Maybe Mars will be a more interesting place. I don't know. But nevertheless, I need to engage in the idea of the self in terms of my own experience.
Yeah.
And this is what Ghazali is interesting. Ghazali, that book of his, The Resuscitation of the Sciences of Religion, is about him experientially dealing with the legacy of Muhammad, on whom be peace and blessings, right? He engages, I'm a Persian man. I belong to this tradition. These are my experiences. I've got struggles about my soul, about my forays into politics, the way I might have sold myself. Am I really, following the right way? So he struggles. And that's the great thing about Ghazali, is that he gives to you a book full of his struggles and makes him interesting. But not everybody read him in that way. Many people read him as, as some kind of, idol that has all the answers. And I don't think of him in that way.
Yeah, I think he has been sort of idealized, and grounding him as a human being who lived in a specific time and yet struggled with things that we all struggle with is really, it's a really different perspective. So I imagine that's why some people love it and, other people don't. But I wonder, on that note, what you think the place of the personal. So in reading your book and knowing a little bit about you, and you're open about your own kind of background, it's not that it's already there, especially this idea of the stranger, which comes out, it comes out in your work really strongly. It comes from the Islamic tradition, and then it comes from many traditions. So again, in the thinkers that I often work with, you have this in Zimmel's work, who he writes George Georg Simmel. He writes extensively about the stranger and kind of the stranger being this insider, outsider in society. And then other thinkers pick up on this in various ways in kind of political and social theory. And it comes through in your work really strongly. But I wonder, what is the place? I think it's been kind of relegated to anthropology. I'm not an anthropologist. I've seen a turn in sociology too, to where you have to be more upfront and clear about your own intertwinedness in your work. And I wonder what your experience is being a scholar of Islamic thought that crosses disciplines. Like, what is the place for the scholar in his or her own work? This seems like a very controversial topic. And as someone who personally finds it's really important to be not only upfront, but also honest with yourself about, where you are in your work, where your motivations come from, and how this shapes your work in both kind of limiting and opening ways. I wonder what your perspectives are on that.
Well, thank you. Let me just close this very shiny window that might hurt the eyes of people looking in. So, this idea of the stranger, I really found it interesting because and appealing when I started reading it, and as I was struggling. So, as you know, I do talk about the dehliz, right? This in-between space, right? And so that became for me the kind of my reading of Ghazali. It's a throwaway line in Ghazali's autobiography. It's a throwaway line where he talks about spirituality. And I said, it's exactly what, explains this man too. He stands at the crossroads of multiple epistemological, sources. He's an heir to the Greek heritage. He's an heir to the Islamic Arabic heritage. He's an heir to the Persian heritage. And so he's trying to make sense of his world in that way. That's exactly my dilemma. And I don't understand scholars who don't talk about their own location in knowledge discourses. I mean, knowledge cannot be artificial, and the production of knowledge cannot be, maybe, in some more, what we call it, empirical approaches where you have to measure and do things. But even in empirical studies, the student of the empirical realities also has his or her soul invested in understanding that one's presuppositions and so on. So I just don't understand how in the study of religion, in the study of Islam, people do not put up front their presumptions and their positions. So it can be secular, it can be varieties of, commitments within Islam, that if one puts it on the table, it becomes a much more interesting engagement. And one of the biggest challenges that I find is that in the West, we have amazing Islamic studies resources of people writing interesting books and people, doing research, and there are opportunities here, both in Europe and North America. But that knowledge does not reach Muslim communities, and it does not reach larger audiences who remain ignorant about Islam and Muslim societies. And they have all kinds of crazy ideas about Muslim societies and so on. That's because many scholars are working in a very kind of clinical situation. And they're not bringing the knowledge onto the table and say, listen, this is my menu, come eat of it, join me in this conversation. So all this knowledge gets locked up into university libraries. A few people talk about that, and the ignorance about Islam and Muslims continue, that ignorance continues, which I think is something that needs to be addressed. So this question of, as I concluded this book, I came back to this question of the stranger, because I also saw, people like Anzaldúa, Gloria Anzaldúa, the Mexican scholar, and other people talking about this kind of idea of in-betweenness, right? Or Edward Said, who also, teaches us about that. And I was surprised to learn that Ghazali also found him in that kind of position, at this in the in-between space, the Deleuzian space. But there's another issue about the empowerment of being a stranger. So being a stranger, being a stranger doesn't mean that you feel sorry for yourself, but rather you find that to be a resource to question, to interrogate, and to create a new dynamic in the conversation about whatever you are doing, right? And I think one of the things that one has to be careful, and maybe in my youth I was a little bit more, robust about this, is not to alienate people in your estrangement, right? In other words, your estrangement is a resource for yourself, but you still need to talk to other people, not put off other people, right? And therefore people like Hannah Arendt, or people like Walter Benjamin and others, for instance, were very effective in using their position of estrangement, but also provided for their readers and for the intellectual communities who engage with them sufficient resources that we continue reading them today, and they become source of inspiration. Or Zygmunt Bauman, who was also a phenomenal scholar, and whose work also is fairly influential.
Those are all the scholars that I use, so that's great when you tie them together. But I agree. I think it's this sort of, it makes you think about your own position, whether you see yourself like in that position or not. But the productivity, a lot of the conversations that happen, and at least in social science surrounding Islam, but Muslims even more, are conversations that are divided into kind of like the perpetrator-victim narrative. So it's either Muslims are evil and scary, or they're terrorists potentially, or Muslims are so victimized they can't do anything. They have no education, and they have no capacity. So like, what else? Most
that is so paternalistic. Both positions are extremely paternalistic, and people don't realize it. Extremely paternalistic. And
Yeah.
Muslims can make mistakes and they screw up badly and they do wonderful things. I mean, they do amazing things around the world. I mean, people always think of Pakistan as a basket case. I said, look at the AD Foundation. I mean, that's a foundation that does amazing work in Pakistan and abroad. Okay, and different parts of the world, Indonesia, Malaysia, Africa, North America, Europe, Muslims are doing productive work. Yes, because the media noise, exclude them, but that doesn't mean that Muslims are not engaged in the world. And so I think that's important for us to deal with Muslims in an honest way. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of the scholarship, or not a lot, some of the scholarship that is coming out does a disservice to Muslims, treating Muslims with kid gloves, as you rightly put it. Either hate them or hate them so much that they're all evil, or love them so much they can't do no wrong. Which is also not a helpful position. So I think we need to treat Muslims the way they treat themselves. And all communities treat themselves. Everybody will say, they are good and bad, and we have people in between. And so let's not treat Muslims in any way as exceptional. And this is one of the issues that I struggle with, is this kind of Islamic exceptionalism. That both Muslims want to be treated as exceptional and others treat us as exceptional. And that's an extremely dangerous position. As European Jews, what happened to them, right? I mean, they were treated as kind of exceptional. There's horrors that came through. And I think what we need to do is, normalize ourselves. And normalize means just be who you are and be honest, and don't have one narrative for public and one narrative in private. And and criticize your own so that others can hear how you're criticizing. Don't say, oh gosh, we can't criticize fellow Muslims right now because then the right wing is going to jump all over us, or the Islamophobes are going to make use of it. They're going to make use of whatever your wrongs were in one way or the other. Rather, let them use the right reasons that you are giving, that you're analytic as a Muslim, as a community, in all your diversity. Let these views manifest in public discourse, and so people know that this is a real community, a community that is struggling, but also a community that has diversity, that has tremendous potential and resources, and have become part of the global landscape, and they're here to stay. We're not going away anyway.
Yeah, I mean, you're not going away. And is there a sort of place, do you think, for that? So there's the kind of social world in that, which I completely agree with, and all of the kind of plurality and capacities, and also the epistemological tradition, which I've seen from a really different perspective. As I study mosque communities, I saw it come out as the response to being marginalized in a lot of ways. I was looking at London and Berlin, so the European context, which is very different, in some ways very different from the American context, but as a response, and also just as kind of using the knowledge and traditions that people have, their response is really through the epistemological tradition. And I saw that in your work, again, in a different way, where you're looking at this, great thinker, but how kind of the epistemological tradition can speak back. And a lot of the speaking back to these exclusions or strangeness, which I agree with, is both this, it's such a strange position because it makes certain things very difficult for people, but it also gives them unique opportunities and capacities. There was this one beautiful quote that I am gonna misquote now, which was also from Bauman, but where he basically said that, it endows you with the capacity to see things that others can't see. And then you had a very similar quote from the Islamic tradition. And I thought that was just like, there is this human recognition of this stranger in between position, the Jihlis, as really maybe the most productive space in society, because you're forced to bring things together. You are those things, right? And so you have no choice. But I'm wondering, what's the role of the epistemological tradition? How can you bring kind of different, distinct knowledge discourses together in a way that is legible, not to just like specialists or, people who have PhDs in Islamic studies or in other, like in philosophy, where you're working with this, but kind of in a broader way? Because I agree, I think there is this kind of like this incapacity to even speak to each other. Most people, what they know about Islam has nothing to do with actually kind of the tradition of knowledge at all. And so I'm just wondering, if you have any ideas about how we can make that more accessible or,
Well, it becomes more accessible in the work that you are doing. In other words, when you interpret communities and live communities in London and in Berlin and how they're articulating themselves, that's precisely in the practices of how they form communities, how they form mosque communities, how they're dealing with the world around them. That's precisely that. And that is the lived epistemology of Muslims. That's a lived epistemology. Unfortunately, we have something within Islam we call the kind of the learned tradition, the high tradition, that is constantly vetoing that lived tradition. Okay, and that's what we need to unlearn. And those people who are engaged in the kind of learned tradition, they are living in a very different world. They're living in madrasas or seminaries somewhere, either in Europe or North America or in other parts of the Islamic world. Then they bring that light to shine on the lived reality, and it's always often wrong that you're doing. So what we really need are institutions and that learned tradition that is meshed up in the lived tradition of Muslims in Europe or Muslims in North America. And then that will be a much more effective reflection. But what you are saying, what communities are doing, and we can see that in art. We can see that in novels that Muslims living in the West are producing. And these are forms of self-making. The artists, the playwrights, the novelists, the scientists, the sociologists who are working and producing knowledge. That knowledge will become legible, but it will not have an Islamic sign on it. It will just be practical. It will say, for instance, someone is going to deal with about the need for diversity in European societies, or the piece that you wrote recently for Contending Modernities about the adhan in Germany being called during the COVID, this crisis, this pandemic, where people are using the adhan as a form of prayer, right? Who would have thought that this would be possible?
Not me.
Right? I mean, in Switzerland, the minarets were banned. In neighboring Germany, they're saying, we want this resource of Islamic spirituality in one, together with bells and other kinds of things and so on. So I think the context, the realities will make Muslim contributions visible and legible, but it's not going to be through some kind of high tradition, but through some very practical and engage and embodied, or what we call an organic tradition. The more Muslims become part of an organic world, it becomes automatic.
You don't think
but the more you treat yourself as exceptional, you're going to be boxed in. And once you get boxed in, you can become a target. And you can easily be also eliminated because of the nature of the way the logic of exclusion works.
It's fantastic. I want to keep asking you questions, but I'm about to be kicked out by the next person who wants to speak to you. But I will allow someone, we have a couple of questions like on what we've just been talking about from the audience. And so I thought I'd just place those two questions before I let people come and talk to you. So the first one was about how you reconcile the dihliz and this feeling of being in between with hijra and the everywhere-ness of Muslims. In other words, they belong everywhere, as the Prophet is reported to have said, quote, "The entire earth has been made a place of prayer," end quote. "Ours is the Ishmaelite journey and inheritance, and so like Abraham and Muhammad, no land or space is alien to us."
There's a question from Yahya Bert as well.
Oh, sorry.
And there's another question there below that. Maybe.
Oh, I can also, oh, you can read it as well.
No, I've closed that screen. So
that says, is the embrace of the Ghazalian dihliz as akin to postmodern theoretical and methodological openness really a call for the end of historic Islamic orthodoxies, whether Sunni, Shia, Salafi, etc.? What would replace it? And how will this great replacement serve us better than what we have now? It's a big question. I don't think I have answers to these, but I will possibly have more questions. So I think the question of the hijrah, as the tradition understands it, La hijrata ba'd al-fath, there is no hijrah after the conquest. So the conquest of Mecca, when Mecca as the shrine city in which the Abrahamic icon is located, the Kaaba, the place of pilgrimage, then the Prophet says, this is the culmination of my migration to Medina when I left Mecca because of oppression.
But I think the idea of migration, the idea of travel, the idea of looking at the other side of situations has been something that has been very current. Muslim scholars and communities moved around the globe, whether on sea or on land, and they made culture and civilization. So I think, there's lots of people move, and I think again, to create some kind of special idea of Muslim specialness or exceptional identity would be problematic. So I think the hijrah, you can use it with a small h, just that when you migrate and you look for better opportunities, whether it's safety, whatever the case may be, it's always productive. So yes, be productive, and and part of the Ishmaelite tradition of being migrants, and Hagar, migrated with her husband and a child, in the Islamic story, from wherever they were to the Arabian space, and then became a space of productivity, and people who then supported the pilgrimage historically in pre-Islamic period. This idea of the, whether this is the postmodern end, well, I'm not entirely sure. What the postmodern teaches us is to ask questions of these big and unwieldy certainties, and these certainties that are extremely hollow, and these certainties that possibly did have a certain kind of, provided some kind of relief at a particular time, but now are no longer part of our lived experience. And so, these Islamic orthodoxies, what are these orthodoxies, right? Every orthodoxy, when you do study them, you see complexity, you see a division, you see problematic. It's precisely this. So I think holding on to orthodoxies might be holding on to a rope that is untethered, and therefore I would say that the job of the practitioner scholar is to ask questions, and we cannot ask all the questions, but you ask a few questions and you unsettle, and every unsettling with it also brings a new kind of settling, right? I mean, if you look at debates in the beginning of the 20th century about the role of women in Muslim society, the people who raised those questions were declared as apostates. They were declared as people that are, Uncle Toms, and people who have, lost their cause. Today, those old debates are utilized by Muslim women who believe that they have a role in society, and they have a role that they've been denied through patriarchy and other kinds of devices of discrimination. And so, what was seen and 100 years ago or more as extremely dangerous, and that everything was going to collapse, did not lead to the collapse, but rather it created new possibilities.
Fantastic. Should I give you the last one more just came up? So perhaps we should give it before we transition into the slightly different topic. So this one was, despite the tremendous ground made within critical theory, including your work, for making sense of the space occupied by the wretched, the subaltern, the non-white, it seems to still remain an advance within, and thereby circumscribed by the topologies of the self. You're actually about to talk about the self in depth, so this is perfect segue. But that is, the self is on the one hand still understood as one which is located within a space, conceptual or otherwise, albeit a space that is liminal and characterized by difference, and also constituted internally by a certain organization of a spatial character. While these developments overturn older problematic topological and spatial characterizations, they remain in the end of topology in the sense of topologos, an ordering of space. What of a scandalous and radically other way of thinking, which would be prior to all such transcendental logics of space? A stranger who is no longer even in between, no longer even occupying a dichles, but one which is radically, I lost the last word. I don't know, radically something else.
Okay. Yeah, so that is a extremely well thought out question. The questioner has thought about these issues. It'll be great to have a conversation and to learn from the questioner's own experiences. When I think about, look, the self does have a space, and especially in societies in which the mimetic societies, in societies in which we imitate all the time through technology, creates a mimesis. So, Walter Benjamin talks about, mechanical reproduction through film and sound and so on and so forth. It is a space, right? And the alterity, the othering, when we are no longer out, the self and the other. When you invoke the self, you're also invoking the other at the same time. You're othering in this process. The question is that how do you do othering for coexistence, right? And how do you now? Yes, I think the last question, it does raise some big issues about some very negative stuff that is happening in our societies. We have racism. America is burning precisely because a police officer violated the right of a black man and killed him through an arrest process in a very barbaric way. But this is not the first time it happens, and this is happening in different places. In different parts of the Muslim world, people are being tortured as we talk right now, and in people living in different parts of the world are subject to all kinds of oppression. I believe the stranger and estrangement creates opportunity for hopefulness. That you are migrating within the self, and you're not going to give up to the negative forces. You're not going to give up on the totalizing forces. So wherever you are, in the little bit of patchwork that you have behind your house, grow something, plant something. Just planting something means that you are doing something, right? Doing something constructive, doing something productive. So I would say, I wouldn't give up. I think the struggle still continues. As much as we theorize, and we theorize, in very complex ways, in dizzying ways, we also have to think about, okay, but don't let your theorization lead you to a position in which you are paralyzed. Paralysis is the biggest problem. And that comes in when you don't think of your thought as also a practice. So thinking is, thought is always a practice. And I remember a line from Umberto Eco when he says that, someone a farmer who utilizes a new way of planting an apple tree is a greater intellectual than the professor who gives the same lectures on Heidegger year in and year out, right? There's no innovation. So innovation is part of the duty and the responsibility of the practitioner scholar.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I'm going to swap out
thank
with
you.
our other.
Thank you so much.
Great.
Thank you so much, Dr. Becker.
Thank
Welcome.
you.
And I'm looking forward to reading your book soon.
I'm looking forward to
Chicago.
Thank you.
Great. In the meantime, do you want to take? Oh, here we got Dr. Ufuk here. Fantastic. So, brothers and sisters, I want to welcome Dr. Ufuk from the University of Virginia, who's going to take over now.
Am I on now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Assalamu alaikum to Professor Moosa and the audience. Thank you, Mizan, for being all together. How are you doing? Good to see you again.
Alhamdulillah. Thank you. Good to see you too.
So I'll start by apologizing if I ask questions that have been already raised or issues that have been already touched upon. But
I'll try and answer it in a different way.
Okay, lovely. So the first question I want the discussion to get going is, why do you think Ghazali called his eponymous work Ihya Ulumuddin, the revival of religious science, or the reinvigoration of religious science? It's a very bold, very universal claim. Why did he choose to call it that way?
Yeah, thank you. I think that and I thought about that a great deal. Why does he give such a bold title to an important book? Oh, well, a bold title to what is identified as his magnum opus. I think that it came from a personal place of crisis, right? And so, as you know, I mean, most people say that Ghazali flees Baghdad once his patron Nizam al-Mulk is assassinated, and but part of the reason might also be, in my view, that he possibly got too deep into siding with the Seljuks in their political machinations, and maybe he felt that he became too much of a a jurist of the state, what we would call the Faqih Sultan, because he wrote apologetics in support of the caliphate against adversaries of the caliphate. He didn't like the adversaries either, who were the Ismailis, who were coming in with a new kind of dawah and utilizing philosophical propositions to subvert the minds of communities, because there's a battle royale going on between the Ismaili Caliphate in Cairo and the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad, and so they were always trying to, influence each other. Especially the Ismailis were fairly aggressive, and so Ghazali then does that. And then I think he goes through this crisis where he says, he asks questions about himself. Why am I saved? Why am I saved and other people are not? Right? That's a question he asks in his autobiography. And he then, people say that he says he can't speak anymore. He has, teaching becomes a burden for him. So it was 4 years in Baghdad. 2 years were very productive. 2 years were when he was extremely, a great deal of kind of psychological, emotional pain. And he realized that he needs to take a break from this, and he makes the excuse that he wants to go for pilgrimage, and he travels around, goes to Jerusalem, goes to Damascus, and these places where he's spending a lot of time thinking about this. And then he begins to write this book, Ihya Ulumuddin, the resuscitation of the sciences of religion. And what I think the reason he writes that is because he thinks that the disciplines of understanding the faith tradition, deen, what I call the salvation practice of Islam. So the discipline of Quran interpretation, hadith interpretation, Islamic law, legal theory, all that panoply of tradition. He thinks that those things have become too formalistic, and they are in protection of certain kind of ideology. I mean, he didn't say that, but that's my reading. That he thinks that these legal interpretations, hadith and Quran interpretations, now become ensconced and in the service of political projects, right? Which is not unusual. I mean, this is precisely how knowledge operates. Knowledge is always dealing with the needs of society. So even our societies on knowledge projects are always in relationship with the economics, with culture, with politics, and so on. So these are the presuppositions. So Ghazali felt uncomfortable with the ones that he was engaged in, and therefore he then says that, I need to reinterpret some very critical concepts, such as, what is fiqh, what is understanding, okay, what is wisdom, right? So he does the whole set of conceptual, resuscitation, conceptual remaking. And now what he's concerned is in this book is, okay, prayers. But what are the adab of prayers? What are the what we will call etiquette, but it's more the ethics of prayers, right? What is ethics supposed to do to my soul? What is prayer supposed to? What must fasting do to my soul? What is friendship? What must friendship do to my soul? Right? Friendship is just not a conversation about how you make friends and how you become influential, but what does friendship do to meaning in your life? So he writes on all those topics at great length, and so it is a project of remaking Ghazali's soul.
Yeah. Isn't it fascinating that there is a stark contrast between how we view Ghazali in our times and how he was viewed in contemporary times? What I want to say is, today it's beyond doubt the importance of Ghazali. He's always the cherry on the cake. You mention him, you reference him in your works. When you write on Islamic theology and Islamic studies, there's an important intellectual figure that seemed to have combined a variety of different fields of knowledge, fascinatingly and very creatively, and invented new knowledge. And yet, at the same time, if you look at Ibn Taymiyyah, for instance, he goes on all assault on Ghazali for succumbing to the temptation of philosophy, so to speak, right? So fascinatingly enough, here's an Ash'ari theologian who employs philosophy in order to philosophize. He's showing the philosophers that their claims are actually inherently illogical. They don't work. What they claim and what they show actually doesn't match each other. I mean, he started off criticizing it, and then he ends up using philosophy himself, which is, a genius move. What I want to get at is Ghazali seemed at his time extremely revolutionary in the way how he combined various strands of knowledge. And today, he almost seems mainstream. Like there is a contrast between those two things. So it seems whoever invents knowledge is not very much appreciated in time, but that appreciation slowly moves in when knowledge expands, when understanding expands, and when there's time between. Would you agree?
Yeah. No, yeah, you're right. Ghazali in his time possibly had some appreciation. When he was inaugurated as the chair of Shafi law in Baghdad, there was a big fanfare, and he was feted by the leading people and so on. But then he ran away from all that within 4 years' time. I think some of the things that he said, he did have critics, contemporaneous critics, but there were also other people who valued his work. So, for instance, Thomas Aquinas quickly got a translation of his work. Some of Ghazali's works within 50 years were began to be translated into Latin out of Spain and other places. So he did get translated very quickly. So yes, while he was critical of some aspects of the ways in the way the philosophers understood the questions of the eternity of time, the eternity of the world, the question about resurrection, whether it be bodily or spiritual, or whether God knows the particulars or only the universals. On those three issues, he takes issue with the Muslim philosophers and really shows them, not only shows them the kind of the red card, so to speak, and sends them off the field and saying that they have really committed acts of that violates the consensus of Muslims. Ibn Rushd obviously defends the Muslim philosophers and says to Ghazali that you've gone way too hard on the Muslim philosophers, because what they have said is that you would agree that on those issues that you find disagreement with them, these are not questions that are incontrovertible. They have always been subject to multiple interpretations. Why have you gone so hard? So that obviously Ghazali had passed on already by the time Ibn Rushd came into the scene, but Ibn Rushd tried to take defense. So I think the why Ghazali remains of interest for someone like me is that while he is critical of some aspects of philosophy, he also brings philosophy and philosophical modes of thinking and metaphysics into the conversation, and he wants us to continue that conversation. He says, for instance, that without you understanding, without you having knowledge of reason, importance of reason in discourse, you will never be able to verify that this man called Muhammad is a prophet by God, a prophet of God, right, and sent by God. You need to have reason. And Ghazali also understands, social context. So he says, people who do not recognize Muhammad alayhi salam as the prophet is because there's all this kind of anti-Muhammadan propaganda going on. So how will a truth seeker ever get to understand what Muhammad has got to say? Because people are, giving his name such a bad reputation all the time. So people, earnest seekers, cannot get to him. So Ghazali creates a variety of moves that is thanks to his philosophical thinking, that he doesn't become a dogmatic thinker. He doesn't become a dogmatic thinker, and therefore we can still, as you rightly point out, we can still utilize his name and engage with him, right? I think that what we shouldn't do is to use Ghazali as an authority, but rather use him as a conversation partner. And I think that's where Ghazali will have everything. Unfortunately, I think even in the contemporary world, someone that I have great respect for, say someone like Professor Fazlur Rahman, was a great inspiration to me. At the end of his life, he turns in favor of Ibn Taymiyyah, right? And while he had great respect for Ghazali too, he finds Ibn Taymiyyah to answer a lot of his own questions, because he now wants to turn to a what he calls a Quran-centered interpretation of Islam. But Ghazali, and Ibn Taymiyyah is useful for him, but Ghazali takes you into understanding Islamic spirituality, Islamic philosophy, and also, the hadith tradition is important. So Ghazali gives you a much more bigger canvas to work from, right? Not that Ibn Taymiyyah is lesser so. Ibn Taymiyyah is a genius in his own right, but it depends how people read it. But I still think there's a lot of place for Ghazali in our
Certainly.
contemporary
Ghazali has
discourse.
an holistic approach to knowledge.
Right.
He approaches knowledge from a variety of methodologies, and he's employing it masterfully. So he's really giving due to the specific field of knowledge. And you mentioned, in order to be able to argue reasonably, we really need to understand what philosophy, what reason is about, and how they argue. What are the underlying methodologies? The question now becomes for us, let's say in the 21st century, philosophy has developed. Philosophy is not anymore the philosophy that Ghazali dealt with, that sort of, starting with the translation movement and the falasifa. I mean, for Ghazali, the falasifa were Ibn Sina and his followers. All they had to say, all what they said and wrote, became known as falsafa in the Muslim world. So today we are confronted with a very different kind of philosophy, with a very different kind of modes of knowledge. Question here is, and some Muslim thinkers have attacked that question, reconstruction of Islamic thought. I'm thinking of Muhammad Iqbal at the turn of the century. He has penned a book on this after studying in Munich philosophy, right? So he saw there, for instance, there is a need apparently to respond to a different kind of philosophy. What do you think? Where are we at right now as Muslim philosophers and theologians? Are we actually giving due to the change of philosophy? Are we taking that into account? Are we dealing with it?
The honest answer would be no. That we are not taking philosophy very seriously in our leading institutions where knowledge of deen and on the faith tradition is produced. We are becoming extremely scripturalist, and the text has all the answers. Okay, the Nas has all the answers. And this is not the way Ghazali or anybody else understood the Nas. So we have now come into a world of mechanical reproduction, following Walter Benjamin, and in very crass ways, we think opening up the Quran, opening up Hadith, you can just reproduce. You can just mimetically reproduce, and that's not the way Muslims understood it historically. The Nas was understood by the human soul and the mind, and it lived here first, and then the text. In other words, today people think that every verse of the Quran is authority. What they don't understand, it's the cumulative understanding of verses of the Quran in conversation with Hadith, in conversation with Muslim experience. That's how authority is created. Authority is not created by 1 or 2 or 10 verses of the Quran. Authority is created through a much more complicated process. Now, the reason why Muslims have opted for this very simplistic way is because of the absence of complex thinking. And complex thinking that is sustained and nourished by philosophical traditions that Muslims had in large numbers and early Muslim. Now, obviously, this division between the philosophers and those people dealing with Quran, Hadith, and fiqh has always also been a divide there, and there's always been a struggle there. But the smarter ones, like Fakhruddin al-Razi, for instance, would bring those into conversation. People like Ghazali, Ibn Rushd, and other people bring them in conversation. Now, part of the thing is also in your ancestral location, Turkey, for instance, or where your fathers came from. A lot of philosophy is taught at Turkish universities and so on, at the Ilahiyat schools and so on. But unfortunately, they are studied in such a way, in very formalistic ways. The question is never posed as to, okay, what is the challenge in our society today? And, what does Ibn Sina say about this? Or how can we enter into a conversation with Ibn Sina, and Ibn Sina can take me halfway, but what is the other 50% of the work that I need to do? What does Miskawayh, someone that you're studying, say about love or affection or, friendship or brotherhood or life, politics and those kind of stuff? But Miskawayh, Ghazali, all those people don't have the answers. But you need to study those people in a way that they are your live conversation partners. Mm-hmm. They can't be dead brown men, the way we have made them. And so we just, put them in the tomb and we entomb them, but we never benefit from them. We don't enter into a real conversation with them and ask critical questions of them and disagree with them and move on, okay? But the key thing is, they don't have the answers. Ibn Taymiyyah does not have the answer for me. Ghazali does not have the answer for me, but helps me in posing the question and helps me in finding the answers. And that is the duty of the contemporary Muslim thinker, that we need to ask the questions and own our answers.
So I think everybody would agree with me. If you look at right now the field of Islamic studies, Islamic theology in the Western world at large, we will see there's a staggering amount of work published on Islamic philosophy. Interestingly enough, almost entirely it's a historical analysis of Islamic philosophy. So we're looking back, trying to understand the debates that were unfolding, and true, it's a very fascinating, intellectually humbling experience. And yet at the same time, it seems, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Muslims do not necessarily engage in philosophizing today. So we are not really trying to, let's say, continue the story of engaging with philosophy. There seems to be a rupture in history, and that we literally stopped doing it. And now there's sort of a new interest sparking in order to understand what Islamic philosophy was, but it is confined into the historical context. The question now becomes, and I want to talk about about your poetics of imagination. So the question now becomes, how do we, on the one hand, engage tradition, and at the same time, in a fashion of engaging with the contemporary debates, how do we bring those two conversations together? And correct me if I'm wrong, I'm giving you a chance to straighten the record. I understand your poetics, and you have to tell me if it's a misinterpretation of your poetics. I understand your poetics is exactly doing that, trying to engage with tradition. But, I mean, you were criticized for having this postmodern jargon, so to speak, in your book. But I see it as cracking the door open in order to get engaged with modern philosophy, to get engaged with those ideas and questions that philosophers are confronting us with, not ignoring them anymore, but getting the discussion going. You know, starting is we have to start somewhere. So interestingly enough, you also pick up, and that's the second issue that I want to discuss with you, within the poetics, a narrative that is very strong in this new philosophy, in modern philosophy, the idea of the self, the idea of the individual, as being the focal point, as the point of departure to understand the world. So modern philosophy's big change was to sort of turn the world upside down. We are not looking up anymore. We are looking through the lenses of the person who is looking into the world. We're trying to understand who that individual is, right? And I feel that you are engaging with those questions in your poetics of imagination by employing Ghazali as a partner for your conversation, and yet you are initiating a discussion. But I want to give you a chance to say what you think about my interpretation.
No, I think your both the points that you made something that I would agree with, and we've had that conversation before. So you opened up your conversation saying there's so much work being produced on philosophy, right? And impressive work on philosophy, but all in a historical way. Now, obviously, we need the history to show what that philosophy was. So we're not disrespectful of the historians, but everybody cannot just only invest in that. What we need to know, okay, now we know this aspect of this historical tradition. How do you bring this historical tradition of Muslims into conversation with the world in the present, right? For that, you also need to know contemporary philosophy, and therefore, whether you are going to be analytical philosopher, you're going to engage with people like Bertrand Russell, or you're going to engage with Wittgenstein, or you're going to engage with Derrida or Foucault or other contemporary philosophers, of thought, who are the kind of, or you're going to deal with Ashish Nandi or other thinkers elsewhere. That's fine, but you need to be able to create that invisible mending between the past and the present, so that you can see your shadow in the society in which you are living. Otherwise, other people are going to make shadows for you. You're going to live in the shadows of others, right? And therefore, for you to belong means that you need to do work, and your intellectuals need to do the work. Unfortunately, among many Muslim people, scholars, not only Muslims, who do philosophy, the history of philosophy, they don't even do the history properly. It's a kind of taking the text and telling me, Ghazali was born there, died there, so-and-so, Ibn Rushd did that. It's not a creative engagement, unfortunately. It's not a creative engagement. And if you look at what people are doing in other fields of thought, people are still reading Augustine, right? Or Augustine. People are reading Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas, but they're coming out with amazing insights. They're coming out with amazing insights, that are usable today because they invested their 21st century souls into that conversation, right? Our folks will say, no, 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 this is what Ghazali said, and we cannot mess with that. That's Ghazali would laugh at you, and he will say you're really funny, or you're lacking some insight into what it is to do. People who want to criticize the postmodern, I would ask them the following: it is postmodernity and postmodern questioning that hit at the narratives of the modern that hit at all the answers, right? That modernity and modernistic thinking, from technology to philosophy, had all the answers. It's a postmodern that punched a hole in it. So I think we need to be careful of what we are trying to hate. Okay, and yes, be judicious users of certain things, but you don't have to, think that, oh my gosh, this is postmodern. There's no more grand narratives, and therefore the whole of Islam is going to collapse if we're going to go along this line. Then you're thinking, then you have very little trust in the edifices that people of the past have created. I mean, these people have invested, and the Islamic tradition is extremely robust. What really makes me laugh and sometimes sad is that when someone asks a critical question, then some Muslim theologian will say, "Oh, that is very dangerous." Oh my God, I just want to die. I mean, why is it very dangerous? Because you can't understand it. Because you can't understand it, you want to tell everybody it is dangerous, right? So up your knowledge, try and understand it, then you would begin to understand before you scream. It's very dangerous. So the idea of poiesis is the question of creativity, right? So to be creative, to be innovative, and to make something new. And that's what the Ghazali also is. He's a bricolier. He does bricolage, takes certain things from different places and makes something new. So a bricolier is a French term used by many social scientists, anthropologists in particular, where if you want to make a cycle, you get the wheel from somewhere else, you get the frame from somewhere else, and you get the various parts and you put together, and then when you look at it, say, oh my gosh, this cycle looks so unique, right? It's because of this idea of bricolage. And so I think of bricolage as something what al-Ghazali does. But I think you're right, this question of the narrative of the self, which is very, very critical, because human society has gone in the last 300 to 400 years through major transmutations. There's been huge transmutations brought about through science and technology and the use of matter and space and power and colonization and altering of the nature of the world. And the Enlightenment obviously ends the role of tradition in society and creates a whole new way of thinking and calls it the modern tradition. And so we are caught, between the kind of the pre-modern and the modern traditions, which are now, controlling us, or we are utilizing it. Look, we're on Zoom. I'm not visiting wherever you are in person. We are using email. We are using telephony, different kinds of telephony, data, information, knowledge. Our bodies are now being regulated by new forms of insight of what the body and what the human being is. Our treatments of our spiritual conditions are also that. So there's been transformations, and we are all grappling. We are grappling to deal with these various pieces. We don't have full answers to that yet. So we are, philosophy is about grappling with changing conditions. And sometimes some of us veer more into the direction of the traditional, and some of us veer more in the direction of what is the modern. And somehow we will find, our way in the next, couple of centuries of what it is. What is the new cloth that we have woven from the gifts that God and the world have given us. But I think this anxiety and this panic doesn't help. Okay, intellectuals never panic. They grapple with the challenges slowly, one by one. But getting into a panicky and calling certain things names and thinking that you are, so there's a whole new thing of decolonial and colonial and decolonizing this. Yeah, each one is doing a certain kind of job, right? But it doesn't mean that the stuff that you've inherited until now. So the decolonial raises a new kind of question. What is, whose interest is this epistemology that you've inherited serving? And so you now have to ask a different kind of set of questions. So every conversation helps, so there's no need to get angry with the decolonial. No longer need to get angry with other kinds of questioning. Question traditions, continue over time.
So you are asking, and I think this is in the Ghazalian fashion, you're asking for literacy in the various modes of knowledge, the capacity to be able to navigate in and between these different modes of knowledge, be capable to speak to these different kinds of knowledge. And isn't that in some ways, and I'm now, we have an audience that's dialing in from all over the world, but let's for a moment, let's talk about the experience of Muslims in the West. And something that, I myself, also born and raised in Germany, as you mentioned, of Turkish descent, living now in Germany, and you are literally stuck between, on the one hand, what you have been conveyed, the tradition and religion of Islam, the culture, the history, and on the other hand, what you're offered in, German society at large, whether it be German philosophy, whether it be the understanding of theology and the development of sciences and so forth. And you are in a position where you have to navigate in between those modes of knowledge, right? You can choose to opt out and say, basically, I'm going to drop one. Let's say I'm going to drop everything that the West is offering me, and I'm going to focus on my tradition only, and I'm going to speak to my tradition only. Well, you can certainly do that, and then you will have a very different audience you're talking to. Or you can drop your tradition and go somewhere else and embrace sort of everything that the other side is offering you. And the most demanding and difficult job is to stay in between, stay put, and try to navigate. And I see that in your book with the concept of the dihliz. It resonates with me in that way. It resonates with me in a way that what you describe as sort of the quintessential understanding of what Ghazali is about and what he has done with his intellectual capacity to navigate between those different strands of knowledge, I find extremely compelling and extremely attractive. Would you mind elaborating that a little more for us?
Yeah. So, I said that, the question of, I found that also very interesting, because we are all, in some ways, we are post-colonial. Whether you came from a country that was never colonized, like Turkey, or or Saudi Arabia was never colonized fully, but some parts of it maybe under British, wasn't it? But the post-colonial is the hegemony of the Western episteme, the Western knowledge tradition that's gone global. So we are all colonized in one way or the other. I'm in South Africa. I'm of Gujarati background, but I speak most comfortably English and Afrikaans. Those are my two languages, right? I had to learn Gujarati, I had to learn Urdu and Arabic. Those are not my mother languages. So what I'm saying is that the landscape has changed. So we find ourselves between different pulls and pushes. And the question is, as you rightly pointed out, if you're going to just opt out of one, and then that's a choice you make, but there's a price you're going to be paid. And when your kids are going to ask you certain questions and so on, then you're going to say, no, you can't read Kant, or you can't do this in German society, or you can't do that. You just have yeses and nos. You won't have the humility to say, I don't know. This is the important thing. I don't know, and I need to find out, right? This is a very important thing. But there are very many narratives of Islam that are thundering in the mosques and on internet. The mosques are closed these days, but they're thundering in various ways and telling we have all the answers. Just come to us. And those are the people I have to be most suspicious about, okay? Because they're going to lead you down a garden path, okay? And I speak from experience, because I went through a number of these garden paths, okay? And they come out to cul-de-sacs and really, really difficult questions. So the key issue is the idea that we need multiple resources for the self, and the self is not singular. So the way, say, Ghazali conceptualized the self might not be the way that we would conceptualize the self today. I mean, say, for instance, this idea that Muslims talk about fitra, right? This idea of fitra, that you're given a kind of a natural disposition. And that this natural disposition is kind of, coded into your soul, right? Now, oftentimes Muslim thinkers think that, you endure in that position of naturalness. The hadith is quite clear that you become socialized. Even as a Muslim, you become socialized.
Right.
Even as a Muslim, you become socialized, and that part of the soul that we have, which we don't know entirely how it operates, but we keep on asking, who am I? Am I encoded with this idea of knowing the creator of the world? And that is the given. But then how do I understand the creator of the world after he had spoken 1400 years ago? The creator of the world still speaks to us in different ways in which we discover nature. And we discover, the details of nature, the details of the atom, the details of the human body, the details of the human mind. The creator is still speaking to us, not through the voice of a prophet anymore, but through the voice of human discovery. Now, I need to put that original teaching into some kind of conversation of what I'm discovering, right? And therefore, the idea of human nature today will not be in exactly the same way that people understood it 800 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, because we are operationalized in a different context and setting. Now, the issues that many people are fighting with that, no, we need to change the setting and bring it back to that original setting. Good luck with that, okay? I'm tired of answering that question. That's a dumb question. The issue is, sorry, I normally tell my students there's no such thing as a dumb question. So yeah, it's a great question. I have other times that I will answer that. But you can't turn the clock back. What you can do is to broaden your understanding of the situation which you are in, and that you understand that culture, history, and context alters yourself. So for instance, 500 years ago, we thought it was absolutely natural to have slaves. Human society. Slavery was a natural thing. Women's status was a natural thing. The other was a natural thing, right? Today, through a whole set of revolutions in ideas and practices and so on, we no longer think like that, okay? Now, some people want to say that thinking that altered that's precisely the evil, okay? So I want to hear why you think that's evil. You want to bring us back to hierarchical societies? You want to bring us back to that? We think of slavery as a practical thing. Yeah, don't come tell me there's also economic slavery today. Of course, economic slavery is not exactly the same as as bondage slavery and the varieties of that has. So don't try and be smart. But I think let's be intelligent. The other big thing.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No,
Sorry,
go ahead. I mean, this capacity to see in between, to be able to think dialectically, to see both sides of the coin, is a capacity that one has to train. It doesn't like fall into your lap, but it is a capacity which you can learn by tapping into the tradition, by juxtaposing the tradition to what you're offered as a knowledge, mode of inquiry today. And that's what you're doing with Ghazali in the book. And that's what Dihliz, the positionality of the Dihliz, is exactly trying to do, the threshold. And that threshold means you're looking into both directions and you're capable of seeing both directions. You need to understand, you have to have literacy. And I think that's an extremely powerful, empowering, if I may say, read. I just want to emphasize that because I feel like when you read through the reviews, for instance, it's interesting. Let me just for 1 minute talk about the Poetics, and then I'll give you the work. When you read through the reviews of the Poetics of Imagination, you can see the struggle on the one side of specialists in Islamic studies who want to treat this as an historical, not normative analysis of Ghazalian interpretation. But then there's something to it, what they can't really encapsulate because it has a normative claim. To me, when I read the Poetics, I see there is actually a call, and you have to correct me if I see that wrong. There is a call for Muslim identity to rebuild. This is a possible rebuild. There was multiple ways of rebuilding Islamic thought and Islamic identity. But this is a very intriguing conception you're presenting, to rebuild Islamic thought, Islamic identity around the idea of a threshold, of thinking that we are in between worlds, and that requires of us to think dialectically, to think in both directions, to master and gain literacy in the various fields. That is, of course, demanding. That is, of course, something that is extremely difficult to reach, but it is worth reaching out for. That's what I sort of take home from reading the Poetics. And I want to give you a chance to respond to that critique.
Thank you. So I think one of the things that I benefited a great deal was through the turn in the last quarter of the 20th century, through the big change in philosophy of language, right? How do we understand? Wittgenstein and other people set this whole thing in motion, but several other people too. And I became a beneficiary of that. So thinking about language and philosophy and how words mean things and so on and so forth. That was extremely helpful. And I found a lot of that conversation also in the Islamic tradition, how Muslim, rhetoricians, specialists in philology and so on, understood the ways and the games that language play on us, and hermeneutics and interpretation, right? And Ghazali and all those figures were kind of very, very critical players in that. So I think that, I'm sometimes bored by the identity question. So I don't use the word identity in the simplistic way. Identity is much more complex. And when I say that, Muslim identity, what I mean is that I want to look for resources for my soul. I'm searching for resources, and resources that are relevant and that can resonate with my experience. See, a lot of people want to give me resources and say, read the encyclopedia and read some stuff that is of the past. But those resources are not things that resonate with my soul. They're not part of my experience. And because if you don't think in a lived laboratory of Muslim experience today, in conversation with the past, if you don't live in that, if you don't work in that real laboratory of where your ideas have traction on the ground, we're going to have false identities. We're going to have paper thin identities. So what I'm calling for is that the Deleuzian position allows one to create multiple resources and pluralistic resources for the Muslim soul, because the Muslim soul is not a singular thing. Yeah. It's embodied in different kinds of cultures. People have different kinds of temperaments. People have different kinds of needs in different places. And so the soul, while it resonates, is one of the most beautiful gifts, and that's the idea what I call dignity. وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. We have given human beings, dignified human beings, a dignity, but the dignity is given through the very act of creation. But this dignity then grows by human production. Human beings, through their knowledge traditions, to their multiple resources, they then create narratives of dignity and how they become dignified. And what is the meaning of dignity? And the meaning of dignity, in an age of slavery, slaves had dignity, free people had dignity, women had dignity, the other had dignity. That was a different kind. A different kind of dignity now emerges. And so we, in the last 150, 200 years, we're in what I would call an emergent space. We're in an emergent space of Muslim identity. We're emerging. We're coming out of older places and we're going into newer places, surrounded by different kinds of technologies, and we're not always very clear where we are going to. And listen, not even in the 9th and 10th and 11th centuries were people clear where they are going to. Everybody, but they had greater stability, but they also had understandings of what the future was, not entirely, but maybe some, and so on and so forth. We are possibly a different age because of the nature of our scientific endeavors and our understanding of the cosmos, that we are much more future oriented than, say, previous generations of people, right? Maybe that is an advantage, maybe that's a disadvantage. We can do things in certain kinds of ways of planning and organizing, and yet we come in front of a small virus like the coronavirus and we're all paralyzed, right? So it just shows that we can be how prepared, we can also be caught flat-footed. So we ought not to be also, that confident that we understand everything. So we are taught, humbling lessons at different times and places. But we also, technically, we can avoid famine globally today. There's nowhere in the world ought people suffer natural other ways of famine, because we have food resources, all we need to get it there. Children in Yemen ought not to be suffering of malnourishment today, right? People, millions of people who are hungry in India because of the lockdown ought not, or in the United States or elsewhere in the world, right? We need to get these resources to those people. We have food, right? It's not the case that our natural capacity to produce food has been in any way kind of impeded. Similarly with medicine and other kinds of things. So yeah, there are possibilities. Problem is that the politics of our societies and politics of global politics has run into great lack of imagination, lack of compassion, lack of possibilities, and lack of understanding.
Dr. Ufuk, we gotta start rounding up, so we've got a lot of questions and comments. So yeah, if you've got any final questions, Dr. Ufuk. then we'll
I
open up
was.
the
Dr.
conversation.
Ufuk, Dr. Ufuk, you do the questions. I'm just going to follow what you say.
So I am looking through the thread, and
I've got a question from Aisha. She's a sister Aisha Gray who's the director of
okay.
Fons Vitae. I'm just going to unmute her and put her on now. So Aisha, I'm just going to unmute you if you don't mind.
Is it all right?
Yep,
You can hear me?
perfect. Bismillah. Yeah, go ahead, please. Your comment and
Well,
question.
I just wanted to say, I mean, from the moment you spoke about al-Ghazali being our friend and how he used things which helped him personally. And what we've been able to do is, I read Ghazali 55 years ago when I was at Sarah Lawrence. I read his autobiography. And it so struck me, being on the crumbling bank, up and away, that after we had 10 years in Cairo at Azhar and opened the Islamic Text Society, we started with publishing Abdul Hakim Winter's Death and What Comes After. And I've been engaged for the past 10 years bringing out Ghazali for children, as it were, and young people. And it has been, you talk about resources for the soul. It's been the greatest journey of my life. And who would have guessed? This just shows the need of Ghazali's friendship, that these books have already gone into 13 languages, including Finnish and Urdu, and they're used already all over the world. And this was the set, except for the Hajj book, which I'm finishing right now. These books were just finished really 2 years ago, the set of books 1 through 6. And I just want to say that it's really profound, the work you are involved with, and that it's interesting that Ghazali can be taken for really solving the needs of the soul today of the Muslim population at whatever level they're coming in on. Because there are many people here in Louisville, Kentucky, where I'm from, who wouldn't allow their children to have anything like Ghazali. So they so misunderstand who he is. So I just wanted to say thank you for all your kind words and your insights.
Well, Dr. Aisha, you yourself have done a phenomenal work through both your printing ventures, the Islamic Text Society and Fons Vitae, your press and your effort, and especially Ghazali for children. That's been a phenomenal project. So people should read these work. Not this past Ramadan, the Ramadan before that, I taught at the mosque here, our local mosque in South Bend, Indiana, and used the translation for people to read about, on the marvels of the heart, right? I mean,
yes, that was a wonderful
so Ghazali
one.
talks about all those kind of things. You see, what you are pointing out, Dr. Aisha, is that the need for illiteracy, and unfortunately, we want this kind of quick fix, what I call, the fast food version of Islam, and Ghazali is the slow cook version of Islam. This is the what's the word I'm looking for? Made by a chef. This is a very complicated, but it is going to take you and give you the right taste. And so I think you making Ghazali available to young children and interpreting and explaining, that's a phenomenal task. And I think otherwise we're going to keep on going to this, quick fix, give me the answer kind of thing, dial 1-800, give me the answer on Islam. That is not it. Islam grows in the soul. Islam is something that you live with, and it's not something that you can pluck out of there. Yes, I mean, there are teachings and so on and so forth that is part of our tradition, but those teachings need to be understood. And that's precisely the task at hand that someone like Ghazali shows. Therefore, many people are uncomfortable with Ghazali because Ghazali gives you the thing and makes you think. It prompts you. And you ask, where's the Quranic verse and where's the hadith? And he says, no, I've internalized the Quranic verse. I've internalized the hadith, and I'm telling you how this hadith works in my day. Now you figure it out how it works in your day.
That's really quite true. And you spoke of dignity in our teachers' manuals and all the activities and the things for the young people. If a child does something in which he gets dirt on his heart, they're taught to say, that's beneath my dignity, to always keep in mind that we are the golden heart. You can call the fitra or whatever, but just working, I thought by doing the book of zakat was going to be, 2.5% and a mudda of grain. And it turned out to change my entire view of reality. And I've just over the past 10 weeks finished the book of Hajj. It was all translated, from the Arabic into the English, and the a grown-ups version is nearly ready. But I made this last book not for children, but for young people. But I had done 2 Hajjs and a zillion Umrahs. I may as well never have done them until I had no idea the parallel of this 8 or 9 day journey to our own journey, both ending in death. What Ghazali says, it makes your hair stand on end. And he's just like saved my life.
He saved my life too. He saved my life too. That's his book, Al-Munqidh min al-Dalal, you know, rescuing from error, right? Rescuing from death. Thank you, Dr.
Munqidh min al-Dalal. When I read it in the New York Public Library in 1966, it was the Montgomery Watt version. I couldn't believe it. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you. Such a
question from Dr. Mahbub Ghani. I'm just gonna unmute you. Sorry about this. I'm just gonna unmute you. Okay, Dr. Mahbub. Yeah, I've just unmuted you. Please ask your question. Okay, so okay, we had a question from Naveed Anjum. I think Mahbub is he there? Okay, so I'm just gonna Naveed Anjum. I think you had a question. Raise your hand before, so I'm just gonna unmute you.
Yes, hello, sir.
Yes, sir. Naveed, welcome.
Hope you are good, sir.
I'm well, thank you.
You know, in the modern times, we have so much of the Ibn Taymiyyah stuff. Everything in the subcontinent, when we talk about Islam, there is always coming in Ibn Taymiyyah epistemology. How we deal with the Ghazalian epistemology and Ibn Taymiyyah, and how we grapple with it and to put forward to general audience, particularly Muslim majority cities.
Thank you. Look, I don't think there's any need to to put down Ibn Taymiyyah in order to win with Ghazali, right? I think Ibn Taymiyyah has a particular way in which he articulates himself, right? And he's very sometimes very outspoken of his own views, but sometimes he's also traveling on a very narrow bandwidth, right, of textual interpretation. Whereas his understanding of language, his understanding of meaning is very different to that of Ghazali. Ibn Taymiyyah means that Ibn Taymiyyah sometimes thinks or comes across that he wants to keep the meaning of the Quranic verses and the Hadith in a very, very narrow straitjacket, and it can only mean that. Whereas someone like Ghazali would say, no, when I think of the verse of the Quran or the Hadith, I'm also explaining it to my soul and into my world. And so I put it through a process of translation. And that process of translation is what we call ta'wil or interpretation. And so therefore, Ibn Taymiyyah very radically disagrees with Ghazali in many places. And he keeps on pointing out, why he disagrees. So for instance, Ghazali cites a Arab Christian poet by the name of Akhtal in some ways as utilization for evidence in interpretation. Ibn Taymiyyah's response is, how could you even use the idea of Akhtal? Akhtal is a Christian. Akhtal's mind is, completely preoccupied with the Trinitarian modes of thinking, and you're utilizing his idea in this particular way of the way you understand interpretation. That is completely wrong, he says, and he goes completely, and blistering on an attack on Ghazali. And that shows you that there are different kinds of temperaments. In Urdu, in Arabic, call it zawq. So you have different temperament that applies to different scholars. Ibn Taymiyyah is in a post-Mongol, attack on Baghdad period, right? Muslims are, trying to find their feet, and he's thinking that we need to have a set of teachings that are going to keep people on the straight and narrow. Ghazali lives at a time when Muslim empire is extremely powerful. He's, sometimes there's a certain kind of tranquility in Ghazali's mind, right? Everything is working, everything is functioning. And so he's interested in tasawwuf, Is interested in issues of spirituality, is interested in questions of philosophy and so on. Ibn Taymiyyah is coming out with a very different kind of agenda. And yes, many people in the modern period, contemporary period, because some versions of Islamic thought can be given to you in simplistic ways. The Quran has the answer, boom, and people feel comfortable about that, right? So, but anybody who comes and gives you an interpretation of Islam, oh man, Professor Moosa is giving, he hasn't used any verse of the Quran to explain his position. Oh my God, that is so bad, right? Because that's what Muslim audience, what Muslims audience want to know is that, give me the chapter and verse, and I can go into action. No,
exactly.
What you need is the chapter and verse of understanding. Anybody can give you a verse. Anybody can give you a verse of the Quran. What you need is a an understanding that precedes that will make you and understand what it is that you're doing. I think my headphones are losing power. I just need to switch. Okay.
Thank you, Naveed.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, we got a question from Yahya Burt. So I'm just going to unmute you, Yahya. Are you wearing an apron, Yahya?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Salam
Walaikum salam. I can't see you, Ibrahim. Where are you?
I'm right here.
Oh, you're here. No, I think, wearing an apron is very appropriate because, you like making a broth and seasoning and putting different things together and making something new. So I think me wearing an apron is very appropriate. And I just made paneer, chili paneer and spinach, as an Englishman. So anyway, so to my question, Ibrahim Bhai, and it's always a pleasure to hear you talk and think aloud. I was in a dialogue with Abdul Hakim Murad, and he's written a new book about traveling home to Europe, how Islam can find a home in Europe. And very much I see the book as a kind of response to ethno-nationalism in Europe. And I worry that Abdul Hakim's response is very much to kind of, in a way, find a dialogue with this ethno-nationalism, to kind of find an indigeneity based in kind of authentic Islamic spirituality. My instincts tend in the opposite direction. I think they may tend with yours, with the Ghazalian view of cosmopolitanism, that it really the question of authenticity shouldn't lie in the nation or in tribalism or in ethnicity, in a kind of cosmopolitan openness. But it seems to me that this kind of cosmopolitan openness is under threat by tribalism, by the new nation, by and even defunct ideas of the market, global market, which are now under threat because of austerity. How do we, with Ghazali, make an argument for a kind of cosmopolitan openness, which seems to be under threat nowadays?
These are tough questions, and you have engaged in with the important thinker. I have yet to read Abdul Hakim Murad's book, Traveling Home to Europe. I'll just order it soon as I get off here, because somebody else, Harun Sidat, also recommended it to me, good friend. So yeah, just to let people know that Yahya and I go back as kind of people who are very interested in Fazl Rahman and al-Ghazali and then Fazl Rahman and Ibn Taymiyyah. So we've come a full circle in some of those issues. The Ghazalian cosmopolitanism still appeals to me, and I think that we need to think of these moments of anger and nationalisms and so on as temporary. Societies will not be able to stay on those platforms for too long. So I'm hopeful. I do worry about scripturalism. I think scripturalism is deeply problematic because it only keeps you on platform 1 and doesn't take you to platform 2 and 3 where there are other trains taking off, and you're going to put yourself in a straitjacket and ask Protestantism about that, so not because I'm at the Catholic University, University of Notre Dame, but I think we need to have a Catholicity about Islam, and that Catholicity is through a certain kind of cosmopolitanism. So I think the big take-home lesson that I get from Ihya Ulumuddin and from, even from, ways of reading the Quran is what we call khilafa, is responsibility. Authenticity is responsibility. Authenticity is not identity. Many people think that authenticity is an identity, Arab, Indo-Pak, whatever identity you want to espouse. Authenticity is about, when the Prophet on the last, the final sermon, the farewell pilgrimage, when he said that, did I convey to you the message? And they all said, yes, we have heard you, right? Basically, he's transmitted to them or handed over to them the message of responsibility. How are you going to be responsible stewards of God on earth? And that responsibility implies everywhere. And I'm delighted to say that someone like Heidegger also ends up and thinking about responsibility as authenticity as responsibility. Now, Heidegger himself might have failed responsibility at times, but at least theoretically, I think we can benefit from him. And so I think, and sometimes we do make mistakes in our responsibility, in the way in which we shoulder our responsibility. We are flawed. We are also flawed. We can make mistakes. We're not eternally flawed because we can be corrected. So I think and how to carve out this responsibility. I think that Islamic thought, as I might be repeating myself now, Islamic thought often thinks that responsibility narratives of the past are going to show us the pathway forward, and that we are not investing in time and effort and labor and practice to create the narrative of responsibility for our time and our space. And as the Quran always says, "Tilka ummatun qad khalat laha ma kasabat wa lakum ma kasabtum." Those are nations that have earned their dues, but you will be judged from what you have earned. And if we have not invested, we can't earn. And I think the duty of those of us who are once we were diaspora communities, we are now part of communities in North America and Europe and so on. And we are at home with this home. We're not traveling home to Europe. We are at home at Europe, but we need to make Europe our home. How to make Europe? There's not one way of making Europe a home. There's not one way of making America my home. And there's also a way where the Pakistani and the Indian and a Saudi and a Syrian has to make Syria their home, because the spaces underneath their feet, those spaces have changed over time. So they have to rebuild new homes under the circumstances they're living. Some of them are not very constructive and positive. Some are in a state of war. Some of, like ours, is in a state of protest and a state of dehumanization, that we have to find our feet. But we cannot give up the struggle. That's the thing I learned from South Africa, and that's why South Africa will always be part of my narrative, is that you don't give up on the struggle. Your struggle of responsibility is right till the end. And yes, you can make mistakes. There's so many things that I've learned from the South African struggle, of errors that I've made, and in my own thinking and so on, that I learned. I mean, and I need to share those experiences with others. So, for instance, there was a time that in my political postures to those people who were collaborating with the system was extremely harsh. And I think that I tried to dehumanize them in my rhetorically, but in the process I dehumanized, because 10 years later we had to sit at the same table with the same people. We had to make a deal, and I had to talk to them as human beings, and there was forgiveness and other kinds of things, right? So this is hard, because we thought that we're going to have a revolution, and all the bad people are going to be hanged, and all the criminals are going to be punished. And what we had was a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, where you tell your bad deeds, you tell, but they will be waiting for you would be a pardon, or unless it was a deeply criminal thing, and you don't declare within that period, then you have to bear the responsibility of that. And Desmond Tutu, or others, Christian Flock, a minister of police, who tortured through putting medicine in the clothes of Frank Chicani. Frank Chicani was an activist and a priest. And Flock then comes and washes the feet of this priest whom he had harmed, right, as an act of atonement. So we have to go through lots of acts of atonement. And I believe, you know, I truly believe, repel with that which is beautiful. Repel with that which is beautiful, then those who are your enemies will become your bosom friends. But this requires a lot of patience and stuff. So in those spaces where we are, coming home means to repel with that which is beautiful. Hit back with that which is beautiful. And that requires a lot of work on the self. It's not an easy thing. I mean, I can't forgive someone who has harmed me, right? Or many people have done me wrong. You bear grudges, right? I have to unlearn those things. It's easier for me to talk to my enemy than to talk to the one who deceived me, right? These are the burdens of the soul that one has to, the demons that one has to work through. So I think that is what I think the cosmopolitan story that you and I interested in. Authenticity is responsibility, but we need thick narratives of responsibility. We need thick narratives of responsibility and a pluralistic narrative of authenticity. Yes, so someone is going to do that, and they're going to do that in a particular way and a fashion and wearing clothing. That's fine, and others going to do it in this way, and that doesn't mean they mustn't talk, and they should not. We should not learn that one aspect of Ghazali when Ghazali, you know, was so harsh towards the philosophers that we are, you know, it's caused a problem that we can't think that there are multiple ways of interpreting what he thought was a doctrine, and we need to say, you know, on that portion, I'm not in agreement with Ghazali, but there are many other things that I like of him, and I'm going to stick with him. So no one is perfect, and the solutions we have are imperfect solutions, and responsibility will also be imperfect. But I'm not as young anymore to be as idealistic as I used to be before. I'm much more practical. Yeah. You're welcome. Thank you for the work that you do.
When I was young, I wanted to change the world, but now I'm older, I want to just try and change myself.
You're cooking spinach paneer.
Thank you so much, Yahya. I'll hand it over to Dr. Ufuk,
Okay, Jazakallah khair.
who will do the final comments and closing and questions. Thank you. Dr. Ufuk.
Yes. So, you know, there are so many things that Professor Moosa has mentioned, and it's asking too much to bring everything to a goal. And I think he did it himself in the past 5 minutes. But the one thing that I would like to point out in the closing remark, authenticity is responsibility, which he repeated over and over again. Putting this into a context, you know, of our times, it means we are taking a responsibility in our hands in order to forge our own future. And that is by looking in the past and finding those moments that sort of gives us, you know, a pathway to the future. And they are those moments, and Ghazali is one of those, and Professor Moosa has rediscovered him in a very particular fashion. And I believe that reading the Poetics of Imagination actually can also be a guide to give us a pathway into the future, to think about ourselves in means of the threshold, in means of in-betweenness, which asks us to become literal and gain literacy in a variety of different modes of knowledge. Certainly very challenging endeavor, but at the same time, if, for instance, another work that we could mention is the Culture of Ambiguity by a German Islamic studies professor, who depicted how Muslim culture, not, you know, some 150 years ago, was defined by the idea of having the strength to endure ambiguous situations, to endure the idea that people think differently about the same topic, and still be able to actually forge society, still be able to forge connections and talk to one another. This culture seems to be lost, unfortunately, and it would be an act of responsibility to regain that strength, to regain that capacity in us to be able to withstand deviating opinions, to be able to actually launch criticism, but also receive criticism, and to deal with these things in a constructive way.
Well, it just behooves me to, first of all, thank the audience who have been patient and listening and carefully offering questions. I apologize that everybody couldn't get the questions in. And to thank Brother Mizan Raja for inviting me, but I also want to thank all the questioners, but in particular, Dr. Elisabeth Becker and Dr. Ufuk Topkara, two great friends of mine, and they have, recently given me great hope. The way they are their scholarship and their reading of the materials, and the fact that they also read my material in a particular way, so I benefit from their insight. This is the next generation of scholars and people who are going to carry the torch of learning forward. So thank you very much, all of you, and be safe wherever you are, and be responsible, but also make something for tomorrow.
Thank you so much, Professor. Thank you so much, Dr. Ufuk. Once again, thank you everyone for participating. I know we've gone way over time. It's been a wonderful discussion. We're supposed to keep it to about an hour, 50 minutes, I think coming up 2 hours. But it just goes to show the interest, Professor Ibrahim, the interest in the subject, also in yourself as well. Alhamdulillah, jazakumullah khairan for everything. Thank you so much, Dr. Ufuk, and your wife as well. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu. Thank you.